Shalom and welcome to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. This is a recording from our 2024 Passover Learning Series with Rabbi Rebecca Schatz.
Welcome to the end of this Passover series. I hope that you've enjoyed other classes that you've gone to. We are going to discuss the four children, which is my favorite topic in the entire Haggadah. I just find it to be a fascinating way of looking into storytelling, into looking into why we have a Haggadah to begin with, which is a tool for us to be able to teach our children and talk to our children and engage our children at the table. And we use the word children, but we really just mean anybody who needs that assistance for Passover. And the truth of the matter is the way in which we engage our guests or anybody who's at the table is all through questions. And then we get to the four children. And though it's through questions, is through others' questions or lack of their questions in some cases. So my hope is that for the next hour, we can together see a bit about the four children. And I'm happy to share the document for anybody to use at their Seder if they would like. There are many different pieces of content that we won't get to in the next hour because I'm hoping that you'll engage me in some of the pieces that I will share. And so we probably won't get through everything. But if you want to bring it to your Seder, if you want to quote it at your Seder, you're welcome to. And I hope that it will be a way into understanding a bit more about these guests that we're supposed to have at our Seder table, and how to ask them questions and have them ask us questions, etc. The only other thing that I'll share is that my brother just got married this past Sunday, which was very exciting and a really lovely simcha. And it is Parshat Metzora, which didn't really feel like a great topic to talk about under the chuppah. So my brother instead during his tish talked about bodily functions and he covered that in a very funny way, but I decided to talk about the four children under the chuppah. And I wanted to discuss, he's the baby of our four children. I'm the oldest and he's the baby. And I wanted to talk to him and his now wife about what it means to see the other children in one another and complete them. And so there was a picture that Tybal put up a few minutes ago, which I actually referenced in my words to them, which comes from our childhood Haggadah. It's the RA's Haggadah, and it shows, you can see it, she's showing it right now. It shows every child has a little bit of the color of another child in them, claiming that we all have each one of these four children in us at all times. And one Pesach, we might be the child who doesn't know how to ask, and one Pesach, we might be the wicked child, etc., etc. But it's important for us to be able to not only be acknowledged for whichever child we are that year, but to also acknowledge others for the children that they are in life, but also at the Seder table. So I just want to preface it all by sharing that little piece of information. And now I will share my screen and we will look at this source sheet together. And again, I'll put it in the chat so that if anybody wants to use it for their own Seders, you're welcome to. You don't have to ask my permission. I am giving it to you from the outset. Okay. So here, where's my chat? Oh, here. Okay. All right. So there's the doc. If you want it later, I just put it in the chat. So, okay. I just wanted to be able to see anyone who wanted to be seen. If you would like to show your face, I would love to see you. But I know that for some of you, you're probably eating or running around koshering or doing whatever you're doing. You won't distract me. It would be lovely to see you if you want to be on screen. So I want to start with this picture here. And maybe we can just hear from a few people to start off. What are you seeing in this? What are you seeing in this photograph? It's by Zion Ozeri. What are you seeing in this photograph? Call it out. No need to be
very cute preschool kids.
Great. Very cute preschool kids. Great. What else?
I see a shy child, a curious child,
Okay.
a little bit fearful, suspicious.
Yeah.
Then I see she wants to ask questions. The one that's in the lower, looking up at the mom.
Great. Fabulous. Anybody else see anything else?
I just want to, I love his Haggadah. I love his Haggadah. And he's supposed to have a new one out, and I've been waiting a few years, and every year I look and it's not out yet.
I didn't even know that this was from, it just said that it was his photograph. I didn't even know he had a Haggadah.
If I heard you correctly, old person hearing, didn't you say Zion Ozeri?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'll send you what his previous one was.
Amazing. That'd be awesome. I worked with his daughter, actually. We taught a class together. So I've met him, but I didn't realize that he had his own Haggadah. That's amazing. This picture, when I found it, just said his name. It didn't say that it was from anywhere. So happy to know that it's from a Haggadah. That's fabulous.
I'm not sure it's from a Haggadah. I just recognize the name as one of the Haggadahs I own.
Got it. I see. Okay, great. Good to know. Thank you for clarifying. When I first saw this photo, I thought of wonder just in their eyes in general. All of them seem to be really in awe or wondering or in wonder of the world, right? There's something in their eyes that just speaks to the innocence of being a child and just playing on a playground. Mike, did you want to say something? Okay. I thought you unmuted to say something. Okay. So we're going to look at very traditional texts first about the four children, and then we'll get into some more modern texts. So this is from the Haggadah. It says, Keneged arba vanim dibra Torah. So corresponding to or according to four children, the Torah speaks, Echad chacham, ve'echad rasha, ve'echad tam, ve'echad she'eno yodea lish'ol. So we're going to break those four down in just a second, as you probably recognize from the Haggadah. But the first one is chacham, which we would translate in English as wise. You're going to see why in a moment. I don't love these translations. Echad rasha, mean one is wicked or evil. One is tam, one is simple or maybe naive. And then one doesn't know how to ask. So those are the four categories of these boys, really, is what the banim means. They're translated as children because banim can also mean children. But it doesn't actually give an age, right? We're all children to somebody. So we think of them as children, like in the photo above, but really they could be just anybody who is a child, which is any human being on the planet is a child to somebody. And therefore this is inclusive of all people who will be at a Seder. So the Mishnah in Pesachim, which is one of the tractates of Mishnah, only talks about the Seder in chapter 10. Nowhere else. Everywhere else is talking about the sacrifice, the Korban Pesach, or talking about chametz or all those kinds of things. At no point do we talk about the Seder until you get all the way to the 10th chapter of this Mishnah. So here in the 10th chapter it says, Ulefi da'ato shel ben aviv melamdo. So even without looking at the English, you're seeing the word ben again, right? You're hearing this same word. And what this means in Hebrew is according to his knowledge or his, it says here, intelligence or understanding of a child. That's the way that the father or the parent teaches them. So why do you think this is important when learning about the Haggadah? What does this say about the Haggadah and about children's participation or understanding at a Seder?
Rabbi Schatz, it's
yes,
Paula.
Go ahead. Hi, Paula.
Hi. I'm still, what a day. So I think it's because we have to teach
we can't have any expectations that people walk in or these children walk in or that we walk in knowing.
Correct.
And that it's for me, it's like respectful that you approach each of the people, at your Seder. This year and last year, we've been using like the PJ Library Haggadah because it's really important to us that, a 5-year-old and a 3-year-old love this.
Totally.
And then there are supplements, like this will be a supplement for the grown-ups. Right. But this year will also be especially challenging because how do you not talk about violence in front of, we've got 5, the first night there's like 4 toddlers and the second night there's 7 young, people under, it's like, this is where it's not an adult, it is an adult Seder, but geared towards children.
Sure. And I think that that's exactly what this Mishnah is saying, right? Which is know your audience and teach/prepare for the audience that you have because you want to meet them where they're at. You don't want the information to be above their heads. So for people who grew up with Seders where a grandparent or an uncle or a father stood at the head of the table, standing, reading from a book, explaining nothing, but reading word after word after word, that actually is the wrong way of doing a Seder, right? According to the rabbis and according to the Mishnah, unless you understand the words that are coming out of that person's mouth, which is very few people and definitely not people for whom their first language is English and not Hebrew, right? It's a very tough position to be in. And it's not actually doing this. It's not recognizing content ability or developmental understanding and then teaching or preparing in your case for that, like directly for that. So that's exactly right. And I think first of all, I'm happy to discuss with you ways in which you can insert content, even if it's going to go over their heads at certain points. But also there's some beautiful things about having 2 Seders, right? There's ways in which if there are 2 Seders, even if the kids are present at both, one can be a little bit more serious than the other one, knowing that they're just going to have to sit through it. That's how I grew up also. But that way the parents and the adults are also getting some content out of their experience.
It's funny. I think the first night, the majority of people who came last year and they loved the PJ Library.
Right. Amazing.
Like the grown-ups, it just sort of hit them. Them. And the second night we have more observant Jews coming, and we're all looking forward to one where it's like, okay, what will this one be? Not just PJ Library, but plus.
Great.
Did you say PJ Library, like the books that I get sent every month?
Yeah.
They have a Haggadah?
Yeah, it's fantastic. You can download it for free. You can print it.
That's a riot.
Okay,
you can buy them too.
Marion and then Tybal. No.
It's the best.
So I just want to interject a slightly different piece of this, which is, I don't know if you remember this, but there were studies a long time ago just about regular teaching.
Yeah.
And how if they told the teacher that all the kids were slow, and then they told another teacher that all the kids were gifted, but what they did is they switched it. So when they did that, they found that the kids they taught as if the children were slow, and they taught as if the children were gifted. And the kids who were slower or not gifted, whatever, ended up being spectacular students and really learning a lot because the expectation was that they would learn and they would be, not the goof-offs.
Totally.
So for me, it's sort of a combination of how to do this in a way that, as was said before, respects their general intelligence and so forth, and not talk down to them and yet still be able to be at their level. So there's some kind of a balance or kind of something that has to take place to do both.
Yeah. Yeah, that's exactly right. And just to add on to that, making something student centered, right, is exactly what the Haggadah is asking for us, right? To make sure that not student in terms of like paper, pencil, kid in a classroom, but to make sure that the subject of learning is at the center of how things should be taught, right? So not just your really fabulous example of assuming a certain type of ability and therefore excelling because we've actually noted the ability in the room, in addition, knowing that the interest of those students should be at the center of how we prepare, right? So not just their ability, but also their interest, because combined, that will really allow them to not only be at a level for which the information can easily be attained, but also would be interested in the information that's now then coming at them. I love that. Thank you for sharing that example. Tybal.
Two things. I put it in the chat and I also emailed you the Zion Ozeri Haggadah. He's a photographer, but it's mostly photos of Jewish ethnic diversity, which is why I think of it as his. That's one. But the other for Paula, if you're using it for old ages, that's what I mean. All ages. It used to be called the Jewish Braille Institute, and now it's JBI Library. It has a large print downloadable version of the PJ Haggadah, along with 20 other Haggadahs, including the new C-car, but without the Toby Kahn art, unfortunately, but the text of the new C-car. And if you need it in Braille, they'll mail it to you for free.
Wow, amazing. Thank you for sharing that. That's awesome. So now we're going to look at the 4 children as you know them from the Haggadah, what it says. I didn't bring in like the full paragraph for each one, just the main crux of who they are and what they ask. But what I want you to focus on is not how you've heard this in the past, but how you're hearing it today. So you might be hearing their questions differently today. You might be hearing the title or their given title differently today, et cetera, et cetera. So the wise child, what are these testimonies, statutes, and judgments that the Lord, our God, commanded you? And accordingly, you should teach the laws of Passover, right? So child asks, what are the laws? Parent teaches the laws. That's the wise child. What does the rebellious child say? What is this service to you? But really in Hebrew, what it says, Maha avodah hazot lachem, which means like, why is this spiritually interesting to you is really what it means. Avodah is like spiritual service. Avodah is what sacrifices were called in the temple, right? So the Seder Avodah from the high holidays, it's all about the spiritual closeness. So what is the spiritual connection to you is really the translation. And accordingly, you, the parent, the teacher, the more adult human speaks harshly and says to them, for the sake of this, did God do this for me and my going out of Egypt? For me and not for him. If he had been there, he would not have been saved. But there's a lot to unpack there. But basically, this rebellious child is saying, what is this spiritual experience for you? And the adult seems to hear that in such a way that is offensive and explains that this is something that God did for us, that we should be proud of that, and that we were chosen for it to happen to us and not to someone else. Okay. The third child, what does the simple child say? What is this? Mazot, what is this? Just in general, like, what is this? And you say back, with a strong hand, God took us out from Egypt, from the house of slaves. And then the fourth child, the one who doesn't know how to ask, you begin the conversation. At patachlo. And really interesting about this, it says at, which is female. So interesting that for the child who doesn't know how to ask, it seems like potentially the female parent would have been the one to coax it out of them or share with them, which is a really interesting feminist read on that, but a very interesting one. Okay, what do you notice from these 4 children that maybe you didn't notice before, or that you're noticing right now, even if you had in the past, that you want to bring to us right now? What's interesting about these 4 children? Yeah, Tybal.
So this is my new, really upending in a good way thing this year, and I owe it. You might be are you the staff member that does the Rembrandt Institute?
I am.
This is from Rabbi Rembrandt, the Bible class.
Oh, great.
He focused on the word Tom, as in the pure, unblemished, whatever, all the positive. And I always thought that it was, I never liked saying wicked. I always liked just thinking of it as the selfish child or the narcissistic child. But I always had thought, oh, yes, Chacham, that's what everyone wants to be. But after hearing Rabbi Rembrandt on Tom and realizing that's even the same Tom that Rabbeinu Tom, all those thousands of years later, now I've got this whole thing about Tom being, it's going to change the way I lead the Seder this year.
That's beautiful. I love that. It's also Tamim Haya Bedorotav, right? Noah ish tzaddik tamim haya bedorotav. He was innocent. He was simple. He was good-hearted in his generation. So that's a beautiful way of hearing that and translating that. And glad that you could change something this year. That's lovely. Anybody else? Anything else hitting you differently about these 4 children? Yeah, Mike.
I think in this day and age, when you talk about the rebellious child, especially with that, I mean, you have to be patient. So, I mean, I think it's incumbent on the leader to be patient, and especially with what's going on with, you talk about the children in all of us. I mean, look what's happening, when you think about what's happening on campuses and everything that's going on, then you have to do a reset sort of.
Sure. Yeah. It's really interesting just to read patience into this, and what would the response have been had they been a bit more patient with him? That's really great. Or with them. Who knows what the gender of the child was, but yeah. Any other thoughts or anything else popping out to any of you that you want to share?
Yeah, I'm just the rebellious curious. One, the wicked one that also.
Okay, hold on one second. Marion was talking, but then Renee, hold on one second. That's okay.
Well, I was just curious about what's called the wise child.
Yeah.
The idea of a child learning the laws of Passover. Yes. How do you, I thought about that. It's like, how do you teach the laws in that way? Because that sounds, I don't know, a little, I mean, and in some ways I'd want to ask the wise child more questions.
Yeah.
Like, what do you think? What's going on with you and what's happening with you? I'd like to do that with all of them.
Yeah.
Including what you were just discussing with the rebellious child. It's like, well, what makes you think that way? Or how do you feel about that? Or what, more about delving into it so that we look interested in them and what's going on with them, as opposed to just teaching from the top.
Yeah. Great. Yeah. It is interesting that, clearly the rabbis are reading themselves into this, because we think of someone who is wise back in the day, right? Someone who is wise is someone who knew all the whys, right? Why do we do this? What's the law around this? How do we kosher, right? Why are we koshering? What is chametz? How do we find chametz, right? All of that would have been according to what a wise child might have been. But I think you're right. Like how would you expect a child to know all of that? Or are we?
Or is that an older child? And just because they're older, that makes them wise?
Sure.
So that's my question as well.
Yeah. Great question. Okay, Renee, and then Paula.
I was just curious as to if the rebellious child, what you have here is the rebellious child, is what is in, I believe in our Agadot, the wicked.
Good. Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just translate it differently.
Okay. Because we usually, when we do them, we have the the kids that are at our Seder that are most like those personalities.
Right. I mean, we did that too.
In that paragraph.
Yeah, exactly.
Some of them are not very happy that they get the same one every year.
Correct. Yeah, we did the same thing. I mean, there are 4 of us children, so it was always a fun thing to kind of go around and decide who was going to be which one. But yeah, I mean, we did the same thing. And again, as I started the class by saying, we are supposed to see ourselves as able to be each one, not just one every single year, but able to see ourselves in each of these children a little bit, right? That's an important way of reading through this. Paula.
I have to come back on in a minute. I'm sorry.
Okay. No problem. So I want to share one thing about the wicked child or rebellious child or evil child or whatever you want to call them. As I mentioned, I used this text for my brother's wedding on Sunday, and not just the wicked child, all 4 children. And one of the things that I read quite a bit about was this wicked child. And I just want to break it down for you for a second in the Hebrew here. So it says, Rasha Mahu Omer. So the wicked child, what does he say? Maha Avodah Hazot Lachem. What is this spiritual connection for you? Now, we read it in the English, as I think Tybal was using this language, as like selfish or self-centered or deflecting or somehow like even maybe passive aggressive or defiant. We read it that way in the English, but that's not actually what it's saying. It just says, why is this spiritually important to you? Right? I could ask that same question to someone who keeps kosher, right? Why is that spiritually important to you? That doesn't mean that I don't have my own answer, and that doesn't mean that I don't feel connected to the act of keeping kosher, but it means that I might not understand perspective on why it might be spiritually important to other people. Right. And I actually think, and you can read my Taste of Torah on this, I actually think, not on this, but on what I'm about to say, that there is a lot of spiritual absence in Pesach. There's a lot of laws, right? And there's a lot of preparation, but it's very hard often for people to feel spiritually connected when they've spent a week scrubbing their oven. Right? And they get to the Seder and they're like, all right, well, thank God I was able to scrub my oven well enough that we can all be here and eat this brisket that I made for you. But for a lot of people, I'm not saying for everybody, but for a lot of people, that's not necessarily a spiritual experience. I can say with a lot of confidence that my mother does not feel that it is a spiritual experience every year to clean her oven and the grout on her tile, right? It's not, you feel like you have to do it, and it gets you to a point of a holiday that feels relevant, unfortunately or fortunately, every year. But spiritual? I don't know, right? I don't know that everyone actually feels spiritually connected to Pesach until they're really in it. So a child or a person asking, how are you spiritually connected to this, is actually really, really powerful, and a question that I would love for someone to ask at our Seder. The laws question, right, for the wise child is kind of basic, right? Like, how am I supposed to kosher? Not to say that those questions are easy. I answer a lot of them in preparation for Passover. How do I kosher? What do I kosher? Is this okay for me to eat? Do I need to kosher this? Can I buy that instead of koshering? Right? There's lots of questions around that. Not to poo-poo that at all, but they have answers, right? They might not always be the answer that you all want, but they have answers. And even the simple child is asking a pretty complicated question, which is, what is all this? What's this all about? And the reason that I think it's considered simple is because it opens up the whole story in kind of a grand way, not in the specifics. Like if you were reading the PJ Library Haggadah and not the Steinsaltz Haggadah, right? Not the commentary, but the general, or like the Maxwell Haggadah, right? Like you're hitting all the things you need to hit, but not necessarily all the commentaries that have now been collected over years and years and years in different Haggadot. So I just want to, what I said under the chuppah and what I'll claim here is that I actually think that we've named this child rebellious because of how we feel having not asked the question ourselves, and that instead the people who are rebellious are the people answering the question. Right? The response is not kind. The response is one that's very judgmental and almost attacking of this question, rather than being open and excited to share a piece of your heart with this child. It's that to me seems to be the wicked piece here, is the response and not actually the question. So I just wanted to offer that to all of you, and you're welcome to quote me and have your whole family disagree with me at your Seder. But that to me is a big piece of this that's missing, because we stop at a title that was given to this child, which I'm not sure was rightfully placed.
That's beautiful, Rabbi. I love it. And I just want to say that I love this idea that it's the response of the adults. I mean, that, and I feel like that also leads me to think that it's the tone of voice,
correct,
of the child and of the adult.
For sure.
So the question, what is this service? What is this?
Yeah.
Or what is the spiritual? And I hadn't thought about that either. I don't think of it as spiritual.
Yeah.
In a certain way, I prepare for it spiritually.
Right.
But but it's like, wow, what is this? Why is it that you feel this is important? Is what the child is asking about us and how we feel that this is important. And it's like, definitely the tone of voice and all of that is hugely relevant in this.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Any other thoughts, comments on that? Okay.
Can I come back?
Yeah. Happy to have you.
I just was trying to multitask not effectively.
It's okay.
So do you think then the purpose of starting the Seder with these 4 children is a way of just like inviting us to think more deeply about it, to like stop and have it not be a routine, so that it's asking us to personalize it, asking us to really think about who's at the table. Otherwise, I'm trying to understand, like, really, I love this whole idea of it's the response, that makes it's the response of the adult that makes it, wise or simple or rebellious and things like that. But why this? Like, of all the mechanisms, why the kids set out?
I think because the whole idea of a Pesach Seder is to have an experiential storytelling, right? And we want to remind the adults who are going to stand at the front of the table and read the Haggadah word after word after word, that that's actually not what it's about. It's about hearing the questions from the people at the table. It's about responding to where people are at the table about this particular Passover, right? Every year. It's about allowing for any type of person who has any type of question to feel that they have space to be able to ask or to just listen, right? I think that's why we also have a category of child who doesn't know how to ask, right? So I think that's they're modeling, right? They're modeling a type of education that should be done at our own Sedarim, which is allowing for there to be time for questions to be asked and not necessarily to be prompted, but just to be asked and answered. There's a very, I think it's in the Mishnah, famous, qualification, that if the questions of Manishtana have already been asked before you get to Manishtana, you're allowed to skip it. Meaning Manishtana is really only there so that the kids are able to hear and again, kids, I'm saying kids, but I mean anybody who's learning. I don't actually mean children. For anyone who is learning, they should wonder, why do we have a shank bone? Why do we have matzah? You know, all the different questions. And if those questions have already been asked because a child is inquisitive, you don't have to actually say manishtana because you've covered the reason for its existence. So a lot of the Haggadah is there to just basically give you a lesson plan for how to experientially tell the story of our Exodus through symbols, through senses, through song, right? It's like the best. I think this is why my family always had so much fun with it, because both my parents are educators. It's like the best teaching tool on the planet. It has all different ways of teaching. You taste things, you smell things, you eat things that make you feel a certain way that you're supposed to feel, right? Like you're supposed to have a tear because something was so spicy. You're supposed to ask questions. You're supposed to have room for conversation, right? It's like the perfect classroom in a Seder. And it's all so that you can understand our most important story of how we are a people. So it's modeling. It's just really good educational modeling. That's why.
Rabbi,
yeah.
I think that if you go by, it's sort of interesting to think of this week of Metzora,
yeah,
and warning about words or slander,
yeah,
and thinking about the four children, four sons, and thinking about how each of us use words.
Right.
So it's incumbent upon the leaders
totally
to be kind and to be inclusive and to be and to be there for them.
Right.
In other words, if you're going to make an impact, so whatever kind of child shows up, then the words you use and how you approach them and how you show up for them is all important.
Yeah, 100%. Okay, Tybal, and then we're going to go on to the next little piece here.
I think it's near the Mishnah that you just quoted, but I always loved it where it says there's this whole list of if you don't have this, and it ends with if no one else is around, you're supposed to ask yourself questions.
Yes. Right. So there was, I don't remember where in the Mishnah it is, but you're quoting it correctly. That was a huge topic during the pandemic, right? Because some people did have Seidarim alone. And the whole mitzvah of a Seder is to ask questions, hear questions, answer questions, etc. And so in the Mishnah, it does say that even if you're not with anybody, you're supposed to ask questions aloud and either answer them yourself or just put them out into the ether. And I think people had glossed over that for many, many, many years, but then all of a sudden it became very relevant that really needed to be part of a person's individual Seder if they didn't have anybody else near them. I don't know why I'm remembering this right now, but there was a very funny photo that went around of like a Haredi man sitting at a table with stuffed animals, during the pandemic, like asking questions of stuffed animals, which is a very sad idea. But the joke was that, even someone who knows all the answers, stereotypically based on the look of the person, also needed to be able to ask those questions at the table, even if they were alone. So yeah, thank you for bringing that up. Okay. Let's move on because as I said, I don't think we're going to get to everything, but I want to get to a little bit of everything. So this next piece that I'm going to share, I'm just going to share very briefly. And then again, you have this source sheet now, so you can go into more depth. But what I want to just show you, and we've talked about this a little bit, is that in our Mishnah multiple times, and this is Pirkei Avot, so it's a whole different tractate of Mishnah, we hear of different educational styles and students. And here's one that's very famous, that connects very deeply to the way in which we might also see people at our Seder table. I'm just going to read it in English for time's sake. There are 4 types among those who sit before the sages, meaning 4 types of students: a sponge, a funnel, a strainer, and a sieve. By the way, when I first learned this, I had to figure out is it a sieve or a sieve? Okay, anyway, it doesn't matter. That thing, I had to look it up.
I say sieve.
You do say sieve? Okay. As I said sieve, I was like, I think that's wrong. And Dolly is laughing, so I think it is sieve. Okay. So, so I had to look up what a sieve was. I had no idea. Anyway, so it says a sponge that soaks up everything, a funnel that takes in at one end and lets it out the other, meaning they're a person who might hear something like in this class, you'll hear it today, but you're not going to retain it. A strainer, which lets out the wine and retains the least, meaning it's going to let out that which is favorable and keep that which is not necessarily favorable. And then a sieve, which lets out the coarse meal and retains the choice flour. So the opposite. So again, we are constantly in our tradition thinking about different types of learners and how we engage them. And though this has nothing to do with Passover explicitly, I do think that it would only take very little work to put on, to give each one of those 4 children one of these categories as well and see them as different types of learners. And if you just think about your typical Seder that either you go to or you host, you can also categorize people with these things, right? I could do it for you right now. It's not a hard thing. If you've ever had conversations with people, and this doesn't make them good people or bad people. It's just how we learn, right? That some people, some of my closest friends are people who hear me and then 10 minutes later, if I were to ask them something about what I had just said, would say, oh, did we discuss that? Or is that something that I knew about? Right? Not actually 10 minutes, but there are just those people. There are people that learn differently and that only retain certain types of information. So keep it in mind when you're creating a Seder, because it's important to have, first of all, these different types of people, or it'll be very boring to have people of all kinds at your table. Of the same kind if you're at your table, but also think about these 4 children and how they really do show up in all of these different learning styles. Yeah, Renee.
I may have answered this and I just don't know the word, but is there a difference between a strainer and a sieve?
Yeah. So a sieve is like, when I looked it up, first of all, it's used for like grain, and it holds on to like the not good stuff. It says it even here. Like it holds on to the stuff that you don't want, but it lets through the flour, right? Meaning when you think about a strainer, like if you're washing grapes, you're not trying to hold on to the water, you're trying to hold on to the grapes, but the water goes through. Does that make sense?
Okay. And the sieve?
Yeah, that was the one that I just said. So it holds on to the stuff that you don't want, but lets the flour through. I don't have it in, I have something that's like it, but not in front of me. It's like a thing that, think about like when you're making, and this, I know this isn't what it is, but think about when you're making like cookies and you have that flour thing where you put the flour in and you go like this.
Sifter.
Sure. And it comes out the other side. Like it's keeping the lumps, but it's letting the flour through. It's kind of like that. It's not that, but it's doing the same thing in terms of material.
Okay.
One holds on to the good, the other one holds on to the bad. You can think about it that way. Okay. So what we're going to look at next is a bunch of different Haggadot, interpretations, let's call them, on the 4 children. Again, you'll have this document. So if you want to use any of these in your Haggadah, you can. You can also look up the Haggadah that is being quoted here. But this is going to be a document that has, you'll see there's lots of them. It's only 5. I didn't put them all in here for you, but you can see that there's lots of different ways in which we can understand and identify these 4 children. So I love this one talks about them as women. That very rarely happens. The wicked daughter is the one who dares to challenge the simplistic answers she has been given. She is the one who asks too many questions. She is the one not content to remain in her prescribed place. She is the one who breaks the mold. She is the one who challenges the status quo. Some call her wicked and rebellious. We call her daring and courageous. We welcome rebellion to sit with us at our tables and make us uneasy. So what this is doing is it's saying, sure, you might call her wicked, but actually she's just the child that is going to try to figure things out, not only in her own way, but to push people. Not just to say, why don't we eat chametz every year and get the same answer every year, but to say, why this year are we talking about the exodus from Egypt into Israel, as opposed to talking about, I don't know, civil rights in America, right? Or talking about indigenous people in America, right? Like there's lots of other things that we could talk about that are also about Exodus, and why aren't we discussing that, right? That could be seen as rebellious, but doesn't have to be called wicked, right? The wicked are those cynical people who exclude themselves from the collectivity. Google doesn't like this. Okay. They cannot imagine that anyone would be motivated to do some good except for self-benefit, right? So this was like what Tybal was saying, that it seems selfish. Nor do they realize that their own actions might benefit others. It is the ingratitude of selfish individuals that cause them to be answered with isolation. So that, again, the Kedushat Levi is bringing up the same thing that I did before, which the question is leading to an answer that is difficult, not necessarily asking a question that's so difficult, but the answer is the one that isolates the child from the rest of the conversation. Okay. The Rasha is confrontational, but is still connected enough to come to the table, which is really interesting. If you think about that, someone who's that rebellious might just not show up at all, but someone who is interested and yet still wants more questions answered or has something to offer is still going to show up, which is a really interesting way of thinking about this. He or she may appear not to be listening, but in fact takes it all in. We struggle to know how to respond to this anger and alienation. So again, they're reading it as anger, or somehow pushing it out of their own box and into someone else's. Michal Biton, some of you have heard me talk about this before. Michal Biton at a conference that I was at recently mentioned that the number one problem with liberal Jewish spaces right now is that for years and years and years and years, Jewish leaders approached young people and said, we're going to meet you where you're at, and then we're going to help you with your Jewish journey. And then as soon as October 7th happened, especially on college campuses, Jewish leaders no longer wanted to meet young people where they were at and hear them out. They wanted to tell them why they were right and the young people were wrong. And she said, and that's how we're losing young people during this time right now. And this reminds me of that, right? That if we don't recognize that someone might not agree with us, but is still willing to come to the table, we might alienate them from the conversation, and then they might just leave the table altogether. So how do we still allow ourselves to hear someone out who we might not agree with, who we might not think is right, even if thinking something is right is subjective, and we might then just completely alienate them from being part of the conversation at all. So I thought I would share that. The Rasha's query is read by tradition as mocking, and hence the response is framed as a rebuke. But perhaps the Rasha's question masks a deeper hunger. What if the Rasha longs to draw near but does not know how? Which is kind of what I was saying before, which is this craving for understanding. Why is there a spiritual closeness to this story at all, right? No one's asking about the spiritual closeness of Hanukkah, right? Why do we need to have a spiritual closeness to an Exodus story? Shouldn't it just be understood? Well, what if you're not feeling spiritually close to it? So the question is, why is this something that's meaningful to you? And so they want to become closer to the story, and they just don't know. They don't have an entry point into what that would be for them. Okay, perhaps we should turn the order of the four children upside down and see the silence of the one who does not know how to ask as the most powerful response, emerging out of the awesomeness of the Exodus and even of life itself. So the other four were about the Rasha, but this one is about the child who doesn't know how to ask, right? Maybe we should just, and this actually is something that a lot of rabbis are talking about this year in the wake of Paula's question earlier, which is how can we have a Seder without talking about Israel, without talking about what's going on in Gaza, right? Like how can you even have a Passover Seder without discussing those things? And there are some rabbis, some of whom I have been involved in helping write letters to their community, though not our own, about also you can also just dive deeply into the Passover story and spend some time in that story without needing to make comparisons, right? Not that it's wrong or right or necessary or unnecessary, right? That's not the point. The point is that sometimes it's okay to just enjoy the Haggadah for what it is, and to really to deepen your connection with the Haggadah itself, as opposed to needing it to have some kind of major comparison to the world that we're living or to the world that we understand. If that brings meaning to your Seder, no one's telling you not to do that. But I think that what this is saying is that if you're feeling wary of that, or if you feel like that wouldn't be productive for your Seder or for your life, if you are someone who works in the White House, right, you don't necessarily want to go home and also talk about policy, right? So if you are someone who's constantly in the world talking about things that are befalling our people and difficult for us, you might want to just enjoy Pesach and recognize that from slavery can also come freedom. Again, I'm not claiming one way or the other as being right or wrong, but I think that what this Haggadah is telling us is that sometimes it's okay to also just be in it and just enjoy it and not necessarily need to come up with those rebellious questions. Okay, before we go on to the Reconstructionist Haggadah to read their interpretation of the four children, any questions on this or any comments on the five that we read? Okay, you're welcome to sit with them a little bit longer and use any of them that are interesting to you. I think they are quite, and yeah, I think they're quite interesting. And some of them are written, one's from 2002, but one's from 1989. So, they're not all, none of them are from like this year specifically, right? They're all being written in different modern day era. Okay, so this is from a Haggadah from 2000. It's the Reconstructionist Haggadah called A Night of Questions, which you might have heard of, used, seen, and there are different versions for the four children, and here's a few of them. The wise child asks, "What do we learn from our suffering as strangers in Egypt?" The wicked child asks, "How can the Israelites have let themselves be enslaved?" The simple child asks, "What kind of hard labor did Pharaoh impose on the Israelites?" The silent child is overwhelmed by the cry of the injured, the sigh of the weary, and the groans of those who are oppressed. So these aren't commentaries. These are just other ways of hearing questions in these different voices. The inquisitive child asks, how has the experience of living in North America been liberating for the Jewish people? The challenging child asks, how has the experience of living in North America been bad for the Jewish people? The simple child asks, is our country still welcoming new immigrants from troubled lands? The confused child looks around at the homeless people lying in the street, the undocumented refugee living in fear of deportation, the hunger and poverty, and worries about the limits of democracy and the price of freedom. This is the last one. The wise child asks, is the state, and again, this was written in 2000, so some of this is going to feel very relevant, but wasn't written for this year. Is the state of Israel finally our last redemption? The wicked child asks, have the oppressed become the oppressors? The simple child asks, is liberation always so costly? The silent child hears the voices of the refugees who have found new homes and so becomes hopeful for those who are not yet at home. So I wanted to bring these because I think that there is something very, very important about reading through your own Haggadah, but also recognizing that you can read into your Haggadah something that's relevant to you. I, for many years, did a woman's Seder. I actually think I did one the first year I was here, which was the beginning of the pandemic, and I did it on Zoom. But using some kind of theme as a way of seeing through the entire Haggadah, the entire Seder. Whether you want that to be freedom, whether you want that to be refugees, whether you want that to be Israel, whether you want that, whatever, you can use whatever theme you want, peace, harmony, justice, whatever. But these give you a bit more modern day read into what these children might be saying or asking, to allow you the creativity to also write your own if you wanted to see what that format might be for your Seder. So then these are 4 questions, which I couldn't find who wrote them, but I'm offering them to you and letting you know that I did not. And just for you to be able to think about as you're creating your own Seder and using the 4 children as a major part of the Magid section. So think of other adjectives to describe the wise child. What might they ask at the Seder today about Judaism, right? The wicked child often gets a bad rap. Do you think of them as negative or positive or on a continuum somewhere in between? What other adjectives might you use to describe this child? No matter which adjective is used to describe this child, is always one that has a connotation of alienation. How would you draw this child into the Jewish community today? Simple is used here in a more negative light to describe this child. How could this child be described more positively? What are some other adjectives to use to describe this child? And how can we interest them in Judaism today? And Tybal gave us a really beautiful answer to that earlier. It is so important to hear, cherish, honor, and empower children's voices. What about the Seder makes it a wonderful place to hear those voices? And what about it makes it a challenging place for the child who does not know how to ask? How can we make it a less scary and more welcoming place for this silenced child? So I hope that was a rush to the finish there. But I hope that this gives you a window into how you can really connect this part of the Seder to anybody, whether you just do this part of the Seder of Magid, or maybe you start with it, even though it's not the first thing, to describe how you're going to have a conversation, right? That not everybody needs to have equal part in the conversation, but that you would like them to feel like they have equal opportunity, right? You don't need everyone to speak the same amount, but they should feel like they can if they want to. Very often we say things like no question is a bad question, right? Offering that up at the beginning of a Seder, that asking questions is what this whole Seder, what this whole holiday is about. And it doesn't matter if you've done 1,000 Seders in your life or you've done 0 Seders in your life. Everyone has questions about why we do things or sing things or hear of things. People always ask, why do we do Hallel during the Seder? It's a really good question to ask. So these children, as I said to Paula earlier, give us a model for how we should be with everybody at our Seder. And hopefully this text and this class gave you a bit more insight into how you can dive even more deeply into the children who are in our Haggadah, but also engage those who are going to be at your Seder this year. Yeah, Tybal.
So given your family, who leads? Or do you take turns leading? I mean, everybody sings. It must be an extraordinarily musical Seder, but who leads?
It is very musical. The first night, it's different now, but growing up, the first night my grandfather led. My grandparents are very close friends with David and Roz Moss. And so Ariella Moss, Peter Siles' parents, if you know her. So her father, David, created a beautiful, beautiful Haggadah. If you've never seen it, you should. It's a masterful piece of art. My grandparents have one of the originals. And so we used to use that Haggadah before we went into dinner. We weren't allowed to bring it around food. before that, we would use that Haggadah to go through some of the major pieces and talk about the art, actually, and see how we could ask questions about the Haggadah based off of the art that David created. In today's world, in my family, whichever Seder is being done a bit more formally, usually I lead or my dad leads or we lead together. We don't really prep. So it's kind of one of these things where it's like, we'll lead as we go. But we're all adults now, so it's a bit different. The Seder where we have lots of kids, my dad leads and with my mom, and there are like 40 people who come, and and everybody is asked to bring a piece of the Seder that's interesting to them. And so it's kind of communally led, but it's emceed, I would say, by my dad. But yeah, it's very musical, very fun. It's the place to be. So it's great. Yeah.
Which of the kids were you? I mean, which of the 4 when you guys did it as kids?
Yeah, it kind of depended on the year. I was never the wicked child. But yeah, it depended on the year. Very often I was the wise child or the simple child, but I think as the oldest, I often got given the wise child for really no reason other than I was the oldest. But yeah, I actually think that in today's day, if I were to give myself one of them, I'm probably the last child. Not that I don't know how to ask, but I think I try to ask the least amount of questions, or have the loudest voice, in a Seder, because I want other people to feel like they have access to something that I do all the time. But yeah, Paula.
Okay. Can I share one of my favorite things?
Yeah.
This is me when I was 10 years old at the Seder at my grandparents' house, saying the 4 questions.
Wow.
And they happened to have had a house guest.
Wow.
And he took a picture.
Wow.
And I love it. It used to hang in my grandma's house, and when she died or when she moved into the Jewish home, I said, can I have this one? And it was just like, and I can remember it was the grandpa sitting at the head of the table. Yeah. It's like,
right.
And we don't do this.
Wow. I love that.
But it's just so cool. And my aunt and my uncle and my mom's like high school graduation picture from Roosevelt High School in Boyle Heights. It's like such a piece of LA history. Yeah. It's just really special to me.
I love that. Thank you for sharing that. That's really
fun. Thank you for letting me share it. It's really, it's really special.
Of course. That's awesome.
Do you wear a kittel when you do your Seder? When you are the one that leads?
No.
Who? No.
Mm-mm.
Renee, I
sit at the side of the table too, in the middle.
My father used to wear a white kittel when he led.
Really?
Yeah, I did.
With his European Haggadah.
Wow. Huh. I've not heard that before. That's really interesting. Yeah, no, I don't. I would prefer to not ever wear a kittel, so I only wear it when I'm told I have to. But that's really interesting. That's a fascinating tradition. Yeah.
I sit in the middle of the table, not at the head of the table.
Yeah. I also try to sit in the middle or the back.
Well, even when leading, it just feels like it's easier to engage people.
For sure.
Oh, we're still recording.
Yeah.
There's this beautiful book about, oh my God, I just forgot its name. This woman carried a sack, Ashley's sack. It's a real sack of an enslaved child. Mother gave her this sack. She embroidered on it a piece of her hair, a dress, pecans, as she was sold into, taken away from her mother and left. And they found the actual sack, and this professor of Americana wrote, African American history, wrote a book about it, the background of it. So last year I asked people if they had Ashley's sack with them, what would they have packed? What would they have brought with them? And that question, because one, it was true, it's like real U.S. history, and two, sort of the acknowledgement about our own American history. But here we are in the, freedom of the Exodus from Egypt. It was just, everybody could answer it. It was a good, regardless of your age or observance.
Yeah. Wow. I love that. That's a fabulous question.
I'll send you the,
I would love to see it. That'd be great.
The book. Yeah.
All right, everyone. I'm gonna let you all go, and I'm gonna go, and I hope that you have a very interesting and very engaging Pesach. And though we say Chag Kasher v'Sameach, I hope that it's really much more Sameach than you worrying about it being Kasher, but that it's really a Passover that you can sink into enjoying the people and enjoying the ways in which we continue to ask questions and engage people in all those kinds of conversations. So thank you for learning with me tonight. And if you went to any of the other classes, I hope that you enjoyed them as well. And hope you have a great Pesach and Shabbat Shalom.
You have been listening to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. If you enjoy these podcasts, we invite you to write a review on the Apple Podcast site or wherever you get your podcasts. For more information about Temple Beth Am Los Angeles, go to tbala.org.